All right, so another episode of the Bitstocks podcast, and we have episode number 2 actually with Konstantinos Sgantzos. Otherwise, people know him as Kostas for short, but I like to say the full name just to exercise my Greek tongue that my mother gave me. How are you, Kostas? How's things?
Γεια σου, Michali.
Γεια σου. How are you?
I'm
How's
fine.
things? Where are you in the world? Last time I saw you was CoinGeek London, no?
CoinGeek London, yes.
Just before the world went crazy. Well, the Western world went crazy. I think East was already going a bit crazy. Just before the world went crazy. What have you been doing since?
I'm working. I'm also studying, as I have been doing all my life. I'm writing 2 papers at the moment. One of them is about what we're going to discuss.
Okay. And I know you burst on just before we went live on air with a bit of excitement about what you want to discuss today. So, area subject that you want to focus on, sentient intelligence, right?
We're going to talk about sentient machines. If it is possible to create one, if it is possible to create artificial consciousness, which is something that we briefly discussed the last time, but we didn't have enough time.
I remember one of the comments underneath our video, because our video is quite well received. We've got really good feedback. People really enjoyed it. But one comment in particular sticks out, and it was, host speaks on consciousness, guest speaks on intelligence, artificial intelligence, host still speaks on consciousness, guest speaking on intelligence, host goes back to wanting to speak about consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that we kind of skirted around, and I do think it's very important to bring that into the conversation when we're discussing intelligence, because ultimately, what are we speaking about when we are speaking about recreating intelligence or building something that is intelligence, and where it goes from there, I think is where I was trying to go with the last conversation. But I'll give the floor to you, Kostas. So what have you been working on since?
Okay, let me be clear here. It is a very difficult question if we can create consciousness, because we have no clear answer on what gives us consciousness. We have some good theories. I believe Stuart Hameroff has a very good one, a very popular one, and he theorized that with Roger Penrose, the mathematic Nobel laureate, that consciousness is something that is derived from the quantum states of microtubulus. So, what are microtubulus, you might ask? Within the phase of mitosis, there are some microtubulus that literally can create a quantum stasis, or they can preserve a quantum state, let's say, of the matter. So if we have this stabilization, then theoretically we can derive some kind of quantum equilibrium, let's say, which is the phase that we can have both the Schrödinger cat, both live and dead.
Yeah.
So
the cat always comes, whenever people talk about quantum, the cat always comes up, is it?
Well, the thing is that this is very difficult and it's purely theoretical. It has some great feedback. It has some great criticism against it. So, but I want to start from the beginning. So we perceive ourselves as conscious, as sentient beings. We have consciousness. Where does that stop? And where it starts? We have consciousness basically because we are alive, and we have the ability to have the other people around us who can certify our existence. So that means that you are conscious right now. I am conscious. So I can certify that you are here and you are talking to me and you understand what I'm talking about, hopefully. So the thing is that without having other people around us, we don't have an identity to certify who is who and who is conscious and who is not. We have absence of consciousness when we are sleeping, when we are put to sleep, when we were going to go into a surgery. This is where Mr. Hameroff has theorized that microtubules are the ones that are being affected when we have anesthesia, and that is what literally removes consciousness from us. The thing is that without being alive and having the ability to interact with others, we cannot have the certification of consciousness, which is pretty basic, and I want to stay here. So where does this all start? It starts from the very beginning, right? When the Big Bang started, and we have this quantum state of this zeta picosecond, the one fraction with 37 zeros at the back of it, of a second, when everything began. That was the beginning of everything. And at that point, there was a pretty peculiar situation that derived what we have now perceiving as randomness. So from the very beginning, we started to formulate matter, and then we had the formulation of stars and galaxies and the planets. And one of the planets is the Earth, and within the Earth we have the very first inorganic to organic materialization. Pretty much the first protomolecule. From the protomolecule up to what we are now, trillions of quadrillions of mutations occurred. So the only constant there was randomness. Everything happened in random. So there is a very interesting aspect here, and very interesting ability of randomness. If everything started from randomness, then is it randomness that gave us the ability to be intelligent and be able to have consciousness and to perceive our own existence? Another big question here is that why not everything in nature is sentient, is conscious. And there are pretty interesting facts here. Actually, some birds are partially conscious. If you ever heard about the mirror test, that we have some cats that we tap one eye of them, and we put them in front of the mirror, and they understand that within that mirror it's not another cat, but it's them. So they remove the patch from their eye. This is something that we do into young children so that we can test their ability of understanding themselves. Something like that happens at the age of 2, maybe 3, for most of the kids. But we found out that about 3 or 4 species have the ability to understand themselves.
Is that an adequate definition of consciousness? Isn't that more self-awareness?
Well, it is self-awareness, but it is also understanding of self-awareness. So it's not only I see myself within the mirror, but I understand that this is me in the mirror. So it's something more. So we have, let's say, some levels of consciousness in nature. And if we let evolution work, we may as well have consciousness in other species within the next millennia or even sooner. We don't know that. I would theorize that it is pretty possible to have sentient beings other than humans pretty soon, and we would be able to talk to a dog or a cat in the near future. Because that's how we used evolution to create what we are right now as sentient beings. So let's go to the computers, right? To the computational question. Can we construct something like that within a computer? And again, this is a pretty hard problem, because the main question here is that, can we define consciousness like something that can be extrapolated or to be described as a computational problem? If we can do that, then we can construct or simulate consciousness. But this is very difficult because, as I told you in the beginning, there is a quantum state, a very peculiar quantum state there, that it is very difficult to put inside a computer, which is what Roger Penrose says. When you look at this from the outside, then you have lost all your hope. It is impossible to create consciousness within a computer. But here comes Alan Turing. Alan Turing had this great idea that we recently found out, that he was not only theory, he actually constructed such a machine. They called the machine the baby. And another version of it was a Manchester 1 computer, which was classified through HAT6. All this can be found within Donald Knuth, The Theory of Computation, this great 12-book history of computers. So Alan said this very simple thing. Would it matter if we construct a computer that is able to fool us, that is sentient? Would it matter if it really was sentient or not? That is a pretty bold question. And that was the beginning of the Turing test. That means that we have, let's say, two persons. One of them, we don't know if it's a machine. We have a curtain and a third person, that is the intermediate. And that third person actually translates what the one person says to the other. And if the machine, which is one of the two persons, actually can fool the real man that it is a man and not a machine, then it passes the Turing test. Up until now, we have no construction that was able to pass the Turing test. But things are moving at an exponential curve, and especially in computers and AI these days.
What are the factors that's accelerating the possibility of being able to a sentient machine being able to simulate and outperform and out-trick a human being? Like, what are the areas of research that we've accelerated in that's getting us closer?
That's a nice question. Well, there are several teams of scientists that are working on this matter, that they try to build chatbots, let's say, that are able to construct a meaningful conversation with human beings. So they all have failed because it is impossible for the machine to be able to have a meaningful conversation that lasts, let's say, 15 to 20 minutes. So after that, it starts talking gibberish.
Is that a limitation of data? Like, what's the limiting factor? Is it computation? Is it our design of how we're trying to code something that wasn't originally maybe designed to be encoded on the systems we're using? Where's the limiter?
The main problem here, I focus that it is that the machine cannot understand what it is talking about.
Context.
Yes, it doesn't understand the context, which is something weird, because we do have something right now, a new construction that it's called GPT-3, which is very, very good neural network that was trained recently to human text, and it can replicate the way that the writer wrote that text, which is pretty bold if you think about it. That means that I am constructing a neural net that is pretty good, all right, and I train it with let's say Einstein and what he wrote in his life, and it can write a paper or a blog post. I was baffled when I read that first blog post from that. I think it is pretty much in the news for the last 3 or 4 weeks, because it was pretty big news for the AI community. And now I think Microsoft has acquired the GPT-3 and has licensed the researchers to use it, which is something that most of the people that were working on it, because it was open AI, that means that it was open source, got a little bit crazy about why did you take this and you license it so that there are more than one reasons why Microsoft did that, and one of the most robust ones is that you can create pretty much fake news about everything, and it will be a mess. So back to the original question, though, we have something that can write as a human being, and you cannot make the difference. That means that you can read something that is written by a machine. We don't theorize here. This is actual facts, and you cannot tell the difference if that machine wrote that text or if I wrote that text. All I had to do was to give it about 50 blog posts or text of mine and train it, and then we have a Konstantinos Sgantzos AI that can write the same way that I do.
But that's a easy to grasp concept, very cool, and also even at the elementary level, there's some serious worry and considerations with a technology like that being out in the wild, right? Plagiarism, big concern, especially without a Bitcoin world. Now, but where does it end? Kostas. So that's an initiation point of a cool application, but we being the human beings that we are, and we're always incrementally stepping our way towards further progression. When it comes to the question of AI, where something can very quickly spiral out of our control because we can't really do an adequate audit on how you went from doing what you just described to potentially the next step, which is taking it even further, and now it's simulating your voice, your speech patterns. It will know how you respond to, say, certain messages that come through on your phone, right? And now it could do a much better job of simulating the digital Kostas than the human Kostas does a job of, right? So that's potentially where next step goes. But because it's so difficult to do a measurement of what it took to get to that next step, what does the next step look like? The next step look like? The next step look like? And what do we need to be concerned about with what we're discussing here in terms of the auditing of these intelligence leaps? Because eventually we're going to talk about the potentiality of being superseded, right? Because I think whenever the subject of sentient intelligence is spoken about, sentient machines are spoken about, we always start off with cool applications. But I think the whole, I guess, the narrative have always been spewed through to us through sci-fi and movies is that this is going to get very quickly out of our control. Is that something that you agree with, or do you think it's blown out of proportion?
Let's focus a little bit here on what GPT-3 is doing. It is able to write this text, but it cannot understand what that text contains. It doesn't have the understanding. So it has the ability to write, but not to understand the context, which is not consciousness. That definitely is not consciousness. But it is a pretty powerful tool if you think about it. right? And as you said, a lot of people are concerned. What are we going to do when we have GPT-4 or GPT-5? So the real question here is, how easily can a human being be fooled by a machine? And the answer here is that it is very easy. And it happens every day within our daily lives with clicking on clickbaits and some advertisements and so forth. Oh, I like this, let me click it. Or click here because you're going to win that. And you're that little monkey that presses the button all the time. And it is very easy to trick people with machines. And that doesn't have to be conscious. So that can't have to be sentient, so that it can fool you. It can do it automatically and mechanically. It is the same problem that we now have with artificial intelligence controlled weapons, because people are unique beings in terms that we are able to think not only computationally, but stochastically. We have this duality within our brains. We have the ability to construct deterministic computation within our brains. That means that I can calculate how is 25 by 25. And I can also discuss with you about the philosophical aspect of life, which is something that a computer cannot do. It can simulate the way that we are doing this discussion, but it can never understand the context of that. We are a long way from reaching that point, in my opinion. Maybe, I don't know, 300 years.
When you say computers, right, are we going to stay on the same concept of what a computer is, something that spits out zeros and ones? Or is our understanding of what a computer can be going to evolve to a new state, which new possibilities, right? I know we're now very much entering the realm of quantum, right? Where you're now talking about superposition, where it's a 0 or 1 at the same time. Cats are alive and dead at the same time, right? So with this new dimensionality to the term computing and computation, is this what you see as being a deciding factor to bring about a radical new change of direction as to the full ability of a machine positioning itself for now as human, or being able to out-trick a human? Is that what is going to be a catalyst and a driver?
I think, yes, that would be, if we can simulate the stochasticity of the human brain within a computer, which is pretty difficult to do that. If you do that, you win a Nobel. So if you can do that, then you have this duality, that randomness that is missing from the discussion, that can make the discussion actually vibrant and keep you at it if you are talking to a person via, on the other hand, if you have a machine. So that brings me to another subject that comes to mind within the simulation of the human brain within a machine. So we come as babies, right? We have a neural network constructed from the moment that we see the light, right? So we have this ability of constructing this everyday moments that we face from the very beginning up until we are about 2 or 3 years, where we can understand what we have around us, who is of course we can understand our mother from the very beginning, because it is in our BIOS, basic input-output system. Because we need to eat, we need to smell her, to understand where she is at, and to feel safe around her. And the second part of consciousness is when we actually perceive the idea of father, which is about at 2.5 to 3 years old for the babies. So when we do that, we understand that there is something different apart from our biological being, and we have something to actually talk different things, not only get fed by or get cleaned up or, but actually play some games or do something different than our mother. So all this information is stored inside our brains, in our neurons, and this process is called neurogenesis. We found out recently, that means within the previous decade, that neurogenesis is a process that can go on literally until we are dead. That means that we can create new neurons, new memories, new knowledge up until the age of 85 or 87 years old. So if you think about it, if you take a human life that has all this information in terms of a huge Excel file, right? A huge database, and you have all the memories of that person, all the loving moments, or the bad moments, or whatever constructs his or her life. And you can store that within a neural network that you have designed similar to the human brain. Then that construction will have very, very little to be different from the actual biological person. So this is basically what we call BIV concept, which is in philosophy is described as a brain in a vat. What happens if we have a non-conscious mind within a box and you feed it with information that he is actually alive?
There are some huge things that you touched on, which I'd just like to go into a little bit more detail about to really set the scene in relation to your position on certain subject matters, which is completely tied into the overall conversation that we're having here. So you've used the term consciousness quite a bit in your descriptions. And you mentioned about the brain, okay, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but more of the view that consciousness being an emergent property of the brain. But the issue that I have with the mainstream view on the subject of consciousness and the brain being a source of consciousness is, by the definition that you're using, would you put plant life in the conversation of consciousness, right? Because a plant isn't self-aware in the way that we would depict self-awareness. Like if a plant looked in the mirror, would the plant be aware that it's a rose or it's a daffodil or it's a blade of grass? Probably not, right? However, they do have clearly a feedback loop with nature, right? And they protect themselves when they feel they're under threat. They reproduce, right? And they, like everything in the universe, are governed through the principle of expansion and contraction, right? Takes in CO2, spits out oxygen, right? Now, when I study the human body and the composition of the human body and the composition of all things in nature, really, I think, okay, well, I'm an amalgamation of cells, right? And cells, some cells know that they can play with other cells, and some cells know that they can't play with cells, and they repel and they try and stay away from other cells, which would lead me to believe each cell has its own intelligence, right? And then I think, okay, well, I'm an amalgamation of these things, and a combination, all these billions of cells, all these chemical reactions that are happening every single second, and I am the overall self. So now I'll put S as opposed to C-E-L-L. Now it's S-E-L-F, self, right? And anyone who has fasted would have gone through a relationship between the chemical reactions and the impulses of your cells, basically your cell telling you you're hungry, right? And then your overall organized self responding to that and going off and buying a burger, going and get some fries, or having a drink, right? So when you fast, you take the opposite, which is I'm getting the reactions from my body telling me that I'm hungry. I need to be reactionary. But because my intent is such, I suppress that feeling and I don't need to eat. I just continue with basically my water fast, right? So when it comes to, okay, if we take this further, when I'm, say, listening to the radio and I've got my favorite artist that I'm listening to, right? Clearly the voice is emanating from that radio. If I smash it, do I expect my favorite artist to appear from the radio? No, that would be a silly, crazy thought process, right? Now, to go further, you mentioned about the Big Bang, right? We can have a big conversation about, okay, what caused the Big Bang? Obviously very widely depicted as being thought, okay? So what is thought that then sparked into reaction, okay? Well, vibration, okay? And
well, vibration is a very, very good way to put it, because in the basic equation of physics, E equals mc squared and E equals h, the Planck constant, times f, which is f frequency. You have a pretty mind-blowing assumption there, that mass equals frequency.
Einstein, I believe, was on the right track towards the latter stage of his life, but unfortunately people didn't really take him as seriously towards the latter stage of his life. Where I'm heading is a very unified view, because if everything came from that bang, which you've used in your own explanation, then everything is powered in some way or form a variant of that original energy. In whatever recycled form it is, this iMac that I'm speaking to you on still came from that Big Bang, as did I, right? Mm-hmm. So if we then think, okay, well, clearly an iMac isn't conscious, right? Because it's a piece of metal and circuitry and wires, and like we can make that distinction. I'm different to an iMac, right? But then what scale are you looking at? At the scale in which we're engaging with it, yeah, of course I'm clearly different to a freaking iMac. What a stupid thing to even say, Michael, right? But then let's zoom in, because you mentioned Planck scale now, okay? So if I zoom in again, like mainstream will agree on this, an atom is 99.99% space, right? Mainstream science can get an agreement on this. So if an atom is 99.99% space and everything is basically comprised of atoms, okay? I'm comprised of atoms, you're comprised of atoms, this, again, iMac's comprised of atoms. Then we put so much attention and emphasis, not on the space, but on the 0.001% of the matter that we interact with, that gives us our solidity and the illusion of solidity. But ultimately, if I'm at the right quantum scale, there's way more space in this table. There's way more space in me as a being than there is matter. So why is our thinking so locked into the 0.0001%, where clearly the vast majority is the 99.99? So why don't we study that? What emerges from that state? Why doesn't a proton ever lose charge? Right? And in my opinion, this is where the breakthroughs will come from in this understanding, because I don't see there's no such thing as isolation. And when we're speaking about, okay, sentient beings and we're talking about computation, And then we're talking about basically memory, right? Because memory is what keeps me intact. Memory is what has me remanifest at a very high frequency to be saying what it is that I'm saying right now, because from a quantum level, my body is materializing, dematerializing, materializing, dematerializing, materializing, dematerializing at such a high RPM. Again, it gives the illusion of solidity, right? At these frames per second, at this scale. But in between every single manifestation and demanifestation, you've got this body of data, right? The memory that is telling me, Mike, you look like this. And when you remanifest, you've got to make sure that you look like this. So if I bring this into the subject of AI, computation, etc., you've got quantum computing as one potentiality of basically being able to simulate and be able to re-simulate and have random factors come in. And because you're factoring in all the different variables, all the different possibilities, then you could just pluck out a string if you've got your instrument tuned as such, right? And then I think there's this other world of computation where you could kind of try and simulate what the output would be over there if you factor memory. And this is, I'm now getting into a very deep world of theory, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, because if you do something, but you have a way of remembering, do you need to redo that computation? Can we then compound the computation over like a really broad data set of instructions that are happening, right? Store every single result that has ever happened, and then you don't have to redo the computation, but you can take all the results and then produce something that can simulate something that is truly intelligent or seems intelligent, but without as much of the computational legwork that maybe you would go down if you try to simulate it live in the moment with quantum. Does that make sense?
Exactly, yes. That was actually the theory of Alan Turing. You can simulate whatever you want. The thing is that if you simulate it well enough, does it really matter if that thing that you simulate is really sentient or not? And the answer is probably not. That means that we can have this kind of machines pretty soon, and this is where this sums up. Of course, we will all know that something like that construction will not be sentient. It is impossible to perceive it as a human being. But on the other hand, it will be something that you will be able to discuss in a meaningful manner, even if that will not be for a long time. I think that up until 5 to 10 minutes would be all right in the beginning, and then it will start talking gibberish. And the other part is that if you really construct something like that is able to simulate the way that the human being is behaving, then I strongly believe that it will be very, very fast from that point forth to become more and more like its creator or its role model, let's say. So computers actually simulate what we are pretty fast. We have done this in automation since forever. I think that that was the beginning of it all. We start automating things that we did within a computer. First it was calculations, then it was mechanical processes, then we had PID controllers, we had a lot of stuff that we constructed all these years. So it is my hypothesis that it will not be long before we can have something like that simulates even vaguely of how a human brain is thinking. Of course, this will not be sentient. It cannot understand what is it talking about. It will not be at the level of a human being, but it wouldn't matter because it will be very good at its job.
Isn't our arrogance as man cost us in the sense that we can create something and we can decide where it evolves and to what point it evolves to. Like we assume that we can create something in our image and keep it below the intelligence of us as a human being to make sure that we stay at the top of the food chain, right? And to a degree, I could say even if you look at like the kind of sci-fi models, it's gonna be quite hard for AI to break out of the conditions and the parameters that we set as human beings. But it depends on whether the parameters are coming in from. If it's a corporation and a corporation is setting their parameters, then yeah, okay, that AI is gonna stay within the confines of those laws that you set for, I'd imagine, a decent period of time. But then if we're then talking about interconnecting our systems with data sets all around the world, and it's continuously being fed these data sets all around the world, and then you've got machine agents speaking to machine agents, what happens to these parameters, right? And then what emerges when these parameters are all interacting with each other and shifting around, and then now this machine is getting a broader sense of humanity as a whole. And at this point, I'm not saying that this is general intelligence. I'm not saying that this thing is self-aware, right? But if we're building something that is highly autonomous and its intelligence grows in an autonomous fashion, and it's going to make quantum leaps in terms of like climbing up an intelligence scale that we're not really going to be able to contextualize. We might not even be able to read where something truly is, even if it is at a much higher point than we think it is, because we can't perceive it. I think it's such a arrogance and a continued remistake of man that assumes that we can always control the extent in which anything ascends to, right? And again, going back to my prior point, in the way that I perceive intelligence, the way that I perceive consciousness, I see it as literally the power source of our existence, period. And it's a universal thing. And if the universe itself actually stands for one song, right? One big cosmic soup dancing together. So I see my body as an antenna that is tuned into my unique position in space-time that I perceive through my eyes, right? So I have my state of consciousness, I have my state of understanding. I also understand that my body is predominantly composed of space. I understand that I have 5 bodies. I understand that my first body is the physical body that is a result of my food and my water, right? So basically what it is that I eat. I know that I have the software for my hardware, so the mind, and I don't believe the mind is the gray matter between, just the gray matter between our brain. Every single cell has intelligence, and then you have a collection, obviously, of your cells giving you yourself at your scale, so that will be the mind. But then you need to power the hardware, right? So you have your electromagnetic body, so that's what's actually extracting energy from the vacuum, right? So this is what powers your atoms. These 3 things are physical, and then we have our transitional body, which we access through our pineal gland, which is why there's so many teachings and practices around the importance of the pineal gland and what it really is, as well as a lot of censorship on your pineal gland. But that's now you're talking about your Stargate and your transition body. And then we have a lot of script, a lot of text speaking about your light body, your bliss body. Jesus, Buddha, Tibetan monks, this is very well documented around, okay, there's another state. Some people just like to pull it under the term of being, okay, death, right, and what happens after death. But if we go to, okay, atoms and the energy of atoms and the fact that atoms are predominantly space, if the material aspect drops away, okay, so that 0.001, do we lose all of that energy and the signature of that energy, right? So to me, these are like huge, big factors that when it comes to, okay, the subject of simulating intelligence, my trajectory would be more around how do I get something that is inorganic tuned in to universal frequency in the same way that a human being is tuned in to universal frequency, because it's undeniable. There's no way that anyone can say that we're not being powered by something that is clearly non-tangible and something that we can't like physically relate to in this reality. Something else is powering us. And I think there's two different routes to this. You have the heavy data route, and then storing the memory of computation of that route, and then making it more intelligent by contextualizing in order to spit out results that simulate an organic response or an organic being. And you have this other way of going about it, which is creating ultimately something that, in fact, Marvel depict this very well. I don't know if you're into Marvel movies at all, but if not, you should definitely watch them. But in Avengers, Ultron, okay? So the concept of Ultron and how they go about releasing and creating Ultron is really a great way of, I guess, visualizing what I would say is potentially the other part. And in my opinion, I think that's the only path that you can have something that is genuine, general artificial intelligence. For me, it's a very different take and a very different approach that is far more inspired by nature.
Well, nature is what created us, so it pretty much makes sense. On the other hand, the main problem here is that within our consciousness, we do a lot of things that we do not control. If you think about it, if you see a map of the brain, the cerebral cortex is able to control our hands or moves or whatever, but a lot of stuff is done without any computation. It's coming from the amygdala. So we don't know how we functions as a machine. If you say that Michael, I am a machine, I do not know how I function. So
should we not get the answer to that question before we try and recreate something greater than us? Don't you think that we need to get an answer to that question?
I think yes, this is a prerequisite. If you don't answer this question, which is a very difficult, I think that is the question of the questions.
Yeah, totally right.
So this will also be able to construct a theory that explains our existence here, how we became what we are, and how we are able to interact with each other and have this sense of existence, right? And this comes also to the theory of if we live into a simulation, right? Because in this context, we could well be in a simulation, and we wouldn't know it. Why do I say that? Because there are certain aspects of reality that you can check. That means that you can check, let's say, the Fibonacci series of numbers. Why is it happening all over the world? That is based on a constant. Maybe it's based on the same constant that we became intelligent. This is where I'm taking this. So another field that is very, very important to understand consciousness is quantum biology. It's a pretty new field. It's basically the quantum entanglement of two separate entangled electrons, let's say, that exist within the brain of some birds that are able to migrate from one place to another. And they use that dipole as a way of navigation throughout the magnetic fields of the Earth, which is magical if you think about it. They literally visualize their way into these magnetic fields. So we still don't know a lot of stuff. This is where I conclude. And I truly am very curious to learn more.
And that's the beauty of it, really. But also a lot of risk when it comes to the subject of artificial intelligence, because the more playful stuff, cool. But it's what's going on with the agendas behind the scenes as where they want to take things, which I'm not in this conversation taking a stance against. I'm more interested in the technical capabilities and how these things are achieved and what the theories are, and the thinking behind the theories. But one thing that most certainly I think is very important in the context of AI that maybe isn't so much in other fields is because we are speaking about the possibility, or at least salivating over the possibility of creating a intelligence on this planet that supersedes what we perceive to be the prime intelligence of this planet, which is us, right? And that conversation, because we can say like today, no way in hell general AI is going to happen. It's not possible, yada, 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 right? But then that would be my arrogance, right? That would be my arrogance speaking like I know everything and I could speak on behalf of the whole of humanity, which again is wrong, right? And it's like the leap in realization as to potentially when we are close, it could happen at such a rapid rate that the chance to even have the conversation about how we manage this in a responsible way, I think we've already lost that battle and that race because it's been way too unchecked for too long.
Well, yes, this is the main problem. If you ask somebody that he's doing machine learning and AI and constructing neural nets, and you ask them, when are we going to have an AGI? They will say, no, we will not have an AGI. Dude, what are you doing? This is your job.
It's true. It's true.
Yes. So if you think about it, it's a little bit funny. But where I'm taking this is that I'm hopeful that eventually we will be at this place, at this magical place, that we will understand how we function, and maybe we can simulate this function within a machine. Because the technology is leaping forward at an exponential curve.
Okay, so why? Why do you find that exciting? What does it mean for the world? Like, why is it good for the world?
Okay, the main questions that we cannot solve will be able to be solved by that entity. And this is why I'm excited. I think that if we have something like that, and I theorize that something like that could exist within the blockchain of Bitcoin, right? And we will have the ability first to train it, all of us, with our personal data and everyday transactions and so forth. And on the second part, what is truly, truly important is that we can construct it based on our own image, but not as individuals, but as a society. So there's a big question here. Are we ready for something like that?
What's the ultimate profound question that you'd like to ask a prime intelligence? What would you ask it? I give you two questions. Prime intelligence in front of you, okay? You got two questions. What do you ask it?
Well, I would say that I would like to know how everything was created. That would be my first question. And my last question is how it all ends. All in between, it's magic, right? And we live it. We are lucky enough to be alive and live within this magical place. And this is a gift, if you think about it. If you want to go into the theology of this existence, in the very first sentence of the Bible, it says, "In the beginning," but it is translated in a wrong form because the correct word is logos, which logos in Greek means the reason. It's causality. It was a cause that brought us here. And maybe that cause is to create our creator.
If we could get into this realm, what maybe the trick is that we have always been the creator, and this school of third state of consciousness on this planet that vibrates at this level, that unlocks it as such, that we call Earth and our home, is to overcome our amnesia, right? We're born, we have no understanding, and we are a byproduct of whatever our environment is, which is factored by so many things, where you live in the world, but also if you factor time, what time you was born in, these things all factor your view on who you are, right? And I'm definitely of an individual who is very much believes in infinite, that we are infinite years old. And your body, has an expiry date. Your energy, consciousness, we've spoken about, does not. The story of Osiris depicts this very well. Osiris was obviously chopped up, dismembered, chopped up to 14 different pieces. You mentioned cellular mitosis. This is a story really of cellular mitosis. Chopped up to 14 different pieces. 14th piece falling into River Nile, was consumed by the fish, which ironically became the symbol for the Jesus fish, and was reborn as Horus, right?
Yes.
And that story is talking about the dematerialization of the body in the process of death at the end of the genetic doubling sequence, which is 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, okay? So the reason why it's 14 is because one cell, does it double and become 2 cells, or does it divide and become 2 cells, right? Whole chicken and egg problem. Actually, it's both at the same time, which another conversation we'll get into, but 1 cell doubles becomes 2, 2 doubles becomes 4, 4 doubles becomes 8, 8 doubles becomes 16, and then modular 9 mathematics, how many number 9s go into 16? 1, what's my remainder? 7, so my digital root is 7. 7 doubled is 14. Again, same process, 1, 4 gives me my 5, right? So that's the end of the sequence, because if I double 5, I get 10, 1 plus 0, I'm back to 1. And the sequence is an infinite sequence, and it keeps on going, right? And that really represents the spirit, and the body is the manifestation in that time in the spirit. And that story of Osiris and what they're depicting, and it's the fact that his 14th piece was his reproductive organ that fell into the River Nile, consumed by the fish, and then he was reborn and became Horus. And there are so many stories like this, so many depictions of our ancients, our elders, telling us really many clues as to who we are, what our connection is, and really trying to aid us in getting a degree of remembrance as to who we are, to break away from the amnesia and the shackles. You have so many, I would even like put religion and all these different practices that in some way, shape or form are trying to reconnect a remembrance, right? They speak to us in tongues that are divine, right? To try and reconnect us with the divine in some way, shape or form. It could be prayer, it could be mantras, it can be meditation, but in some way, shape or form, the overriding message is there's something bigger, and we like to just brand it under obviously the term of being the heavens, that you need to be connected with, you need to connect with, right? And we tend to keep these things very much in the physical realm, but again, going back to 99.99% space and the information of that space, and now I'm gonna start talking about blockchain, okay? Yeah. Because I am on a personal mission myself of reading from the genesis of my tape to present and bringing forward the knowledge, the memory of my past to deliver into the present. I am on the path of practices, teaching to read my blockchain. Whether people are of a similar view or not, irrelevant for the point is that I'm making, because that's my identification mechanism. This is the path that I'm on, this is how I'm associating and relating. And when I look at technologies and the inspiration for technologies, for me, it's always coming with this angle and this a narrative. And when it comes to the subject of of AI, Bitcoin, and a few other things, and is thinking about in terms of data and remembrance, right? Because every single one bit is connected to a whole Bitcoin, right? And where this data flows and where it goes and the storage and the memory of it. And this is why I coined away from calling it a blockchain, and I started to talk about it as being a time chain like a couple of years ago. I said, look, it's a time chain, it's not a blockchain. Blockchain's a really terrible name for it. It's a time chain. And then you also factor in the forking of the chain. I see these as just a splitting of timelines. There's a lot of parallels and inspiration really with how I see the functionality of the universe, life, existence, and how the Bitcoin network has been designed, right? And we know Craig burst on the scene and said Bitcoin's the first biologically inspired network. And you really start ripping down and looking into the mathematics and looking into how this thing works, how it's intended to work. There's a lot of it in there.
This is the most exciting scientific project ever created, and we are lucky to be alive at this point.
So how do you see Bitcoin fitting in with what you're trying to do? How does it make it better, or how does it make it worse, if at all?
Well, I always have this fear that when we create something like that, and there's no if, at some point it will be created, just like we created GPT-3. At some point, we will know that it is GPT-15 or 100, and boom, we will have something like that. This will be a tool either for the advancement of the whole society, or it will be a tool at the hands of one who will be the ultimate dictator.
Well, like a dictator that's immortal, so that's a pretty long reign.
Well, basically, for an AGI, I have theorized that we need to construct several AI agents, artificial intelligence agent, just like the functions we have in our brain, right? We have a set of neurons that are able to smell. We have another set of neurons that are able to visualize, others to taste, and so forth. So if we construct several of these neural nets and we have this humongous graph, this mandala network that is constructed within the blockchain, we have this interconnection in a very, very unique way, and we can construct something like that very easily. So at this point, we have the technological advancement that permits something like that to be built, and at the second branch, we have this ability of everybody will be able to control it and derive things from it. Because let's view it from what we have now. The global economy is collapsing, right? The next form of money will be digital money. The next form after the digital money will be information, because this is what matters. Think about it. If you have an AI that is able to construct a full picture of your health or the health of your daughter, of your son, how much would that information would cost? So this is a very broad discussion, and we have the ability to revisit it if you want. And the whole thing behind Bitcoin, I think it is, we can construct everything for everybody.
I think it's definitely a purification factor, Bitcoin. And it's definitely how I'd like to see AI systems evolving, and how I'd love to see them interacting is with some form of regulator. And the only regulator I can see that can not only aid the system, but also keep up with the system and take it to the next level is the Bitcoin SV blockchain. It really is the Bitcoin blockchain. From a memory standpoint, from a computational standpoint, and combining the two of storing computations that someone else around the world has done that could then therefore be useful at a later date. you then combine that with edge computing, we're going to enter a world of a level of computation that, again, I don't think people really realize how quickly it's going to happen, because it's not the fact that we need to invent new things. We've got everything. We need to communicate them and organize them better.
And people don't have the ability, people will never understand. They will use it and they will never know it. We can tokenize everything. We can tokenize, let's say, digital euro right now on the Bitcoin SV. And nobody will ever know. They can use it and nobody will ever know. At the same time, everything will be recorded, everything will be taxable, even instantly. That would be the solution to every theft that has been done within the economic society all the previous years. When we talk about a new Bretton Woods moment that the IMF director talked a couple of days ago, what are we talking about? We're talking about a fair money, a fair society with fair money. So if we don't have this, then we have wars, we have social revolution, and so forth. We need to trust the system. We need a system that we can trust. So this is the first tool. And this is why I support this technology. And then I think that this technology will be the basis for the construction of an AGI in a broader sense of, computational entity. If it is sentient, we will see. I don't know.
So to surmise, super pro AI and sentient AI, and in order, from your perspective at least, right, to ask about our own morality, right? Who are we? Where have we come from, and where does it all end, right? And I think there are many people out there who are obviously very similar-minded, and this is where, from an intellectual standpoint, like, I can vibe with that conversation, right? I really, really can, and we are doing it right now. But I think definitely where it gets to like a question mark is, all right, if there's so many of us, because we're just two relatively intelligent guys having a conversation, right? And you're doing what you're doing in AI. I'm doing quite a bit of work in the subject matter as well, so full disclosure as well. I'm not like against AI, but I definitely always like to introduce caution in my thinking, and also in the thinking of anyone else that I'm engaging with who's working in this space and this community, is that we have I'll say a biological responsibility to be very aware of our influence into this, right? And what's really driving us, okay? The real core things that are really, really, really driving us, because there are other ways of getting an answer to your question, right? And it has been for thousands and thousands of years. Difference is it's a difficult process, it's difficult practice. I mean, groups and societies have been formed off the back of keeping a lot of these teachings out of the mainstream, right? Which has then people looking for other means and mechanisms to get a greater sense as to who we are and what the hell this is actually all about. And this is why I think it's interesting, and I can completely see why there's an emergence of the simulation theory. I guess definitely since Elon Musk started speaking about it, that he thinks that we're in a simulation. And I see a lot of credence behind that. It's a very hard argument to argue against, and a position to take against. But I think for me, it's one of those ones where I think even with 1,000 years of study, I'm still not gonna get the answer to that question. I think even with 1,000,000 years of study, I'm still not gonna get the answer to that question, in a sense of what started the original thought. How did the first thought come to be, and what did it exist in to even vibrate in the first place and explode? right?
We all exist in a very broad space that we call life, right? And I often see people that have totally different opinions than what I have on several aspects. And I do listen carefully because I might have something wrong. I might not be able to perceive what they perceive. And this is why we need to communicate.
That's a great stance to take. Always take the role of student. That way you're always going to be in a state of learning.
Exactly. And you don't have to accept everything, do your own research, but you don't have to say, okay, this guy, I think it's an idiot. I don't want to listen from him. No, you should listen. You should listen. You should pay attention.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So what does the next 6 months to a year hold for you? Where are you going to focus your intent?
Well, 2 papers. One would be on constructing a sentient machine. This is something that I'm working on for about 1 year now, since our last paper with Ian Grigg. And the second one would be how to utilize a way to do computational job on personalized data within the blockchain, but in a pseudonymous way. And there is a very big opportunity here that I think that the people who have constructed this method that is called differential privacy are missing for not utilizing all of their magic on the blockchain. And this is where I'm focused.
So what's the commercial aim, Kostas? License, just have people using your solution once you validate and prove it? Or are you just now just doing it for the intellectual and just to spark some thinking in a particular direction in the space?
I think that my main idea is to put the word out there and let people work with it. I don't intend, my intention is not to get money out of it. It's to put that little brick into making the world a better place,
Awesome. Well, that's very commendable. When can we expect these papers to come out?
Soon, TM.
Do I get a early review sample?
All right.
I'll hold you to that. So it's all recorded. Kostas, it's been an absolute pleasure, brother. We've been speaking for over an hour already. It just feels like it blasted past and we're still scratching the surface a little bit. Any last remarks that you want to say prior to rounding things up?
Thank you for having me.
Always, brother. Always. And we'll do this again. Always, like the last conversation I really enjoyed, but I came away feeling to a degree unsatisfied because I just wanted to delve into some more subject matters. And I feel like this is exactly the same situation. Really enjoyed the conversation. But I think next time we do have a chat, let's make a commitment to one another that we're going to rip the Band-Aid off completely and we're going to really uncensor our views and just go at it and really have what you said is a really great point, and I'm really glad that you're of that mindset that we should always be listening and engaging and learning from one another, and especially around the subject matter that has, in my opinion, one of the deepest ramifications for humanity. I think it's really good when two people can be respectful, have polarizing views, and convey them in a way that is going to benefit an audience in order to solicit their own discernment and make their own minds up. So if your whole motif and narrative is all about intellectual stimuli and people thinking around this subject matter with your paper, etc., I'd love to be able to aid you in that process and just having continued great discourse. So I would love to do this again, Kostas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And as always, guys, love and light. We've got a few podcasts lined up and we're going to be a lot more aggressive moving forward. We're not going to let COVID slow us down, although we did for a little momentary bit while we're getting our studio, etc. sorted out, but we've committed with the studio, said basically screw COVID. We need to get very serious again and start rebuilding up our momentum. So you can expect a lot of content to be coming out from the media channel. But until then, love and light, and Kostas again, appreciate you, brother. We'll speak again soon.